Good to see you, Nick.
Good to see you too, Josh.
Yeah, just so glad to get a minute to connect with you. I'd really love to understand more of your story and where you got started, where your family got started in the hotel business. I think you said your first hotel job was cleaning out air ducts and doing work like that. So what's the backstory there?
Yeah, so I grew up in the business because my folks met working in a hotel in 1973. My parents, Nick and Vicky Massad, met. Well, Nick Massad met Vicky Taylor at a Sheraton, the Sheraton Oak Cliff in Dallas, Texas.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. And
We
my
don't
dad
even
had
have
just,
a Sheraton in Oak Cliff anymore. I live in Oak Cliff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
it's where 35 and 67 split off. And the building is still there. It's no longer a hotel, but they met there in 73 working
Wow.
after my dad got out of school, and my mom had been working in the hotel business because her grandmother and grandfather actually owned a small motel in Waxahachie where she grew up. And so she was always around the motel and the restaurant, and her parents dabbled in hospitality. So her whole family had an upbringing around service in one way or another. And my dad got his first job at a Dairy Queen when he was about 14. And so he kind of worked his way through school, and like a lot of people did. And so they ended up just getting good hotel jobs and fell in love and got married in 1975 and moved to Houston in 78 as my dad was rising in the ranks at American Liberty Hospitality, which at the time was owned by a family out of Dallas, and their parent company eventually wanted to exit the hotel management space and offered the management company to my parents in the late 80s. And so right around
And so was it
1990.
a management company only at that point, or did they also own hotels already at American Liberty?
So the company owned and operated,
Okay.
and they were developing a small brand that was akin to a Hampton Inn, or really more of like it was more of like an Embassy or like a Homewood or Residence Inn comp services offering, where there was a really great breakfast free every day and a manager's reception every day. And the manager usually lived on property at these smaller hotels. They were called home place inns. Like a lot of people around the country, they were feeling out and figuring out the select service space. And so as all of these pioneers were kind of developing that space, the brands were buying up and crafting on the space and rolling out these brands. And so as my folks were able to buy the management company, they were also able to dabbling in real estate by buying and building small hotels, and began franchising. And the franchise companies had, at the time, quite a number of options growing. So these names that we take for granted now, like Holiday Inn Express, that was kind of like huge in its infancy. And that concept of going from sort of an exterior corridor motel to an interior corridor hotel, even though it was low rise, that was a big step up. And then moving to a mid-rise building or something with a structured garage or a high-rise building, those were the next steps along the way.
Yeah.
And so they kind of played a little bit of bigger and better on the real estate over the years as they continued to manage different product types, going through the majority of product types and submarkets, with the exception of luxury and some of those asset classes, but really finding the sweet spot in managing select service product and taking that knowledge and being able to develop a very cost-effective, functional product that you're building from the ground up. And so realizing a lot of cost efficiencies, because again, you're very aware of what is needed and cutting the things that are not needed, and then building the product for the operational efficiencies that you want moving forward and staffing it appropriately. And so finding that sort of balance between product and service was really the last couple of decades of getting into a little bit bigger building where you have a little more efficiency and getting into a little larger key counts where you're able to generate a little bit more fees on the operation, which make things a little bit easier than the original 40 and 60 room motels that they started out with.
Yeah, wow. And so you were a kid going through all of this with your parents, right? Were you around when they were working for American Liberty, and then when your dad and mom were able to purchase it or to take it
We
over?
were, yeah. So the
Mm-hmm.
earliest memories are growing up, crawling around the bar, crawling around Sunday brunch,
Yeah.
sleeping in the
Uh-huh.
hotels when dad was MOD,
Mm-hmm.
getting to literally playing hide and seek in housekeeping, hiding in the cooler in the kitchen, or just going in there because it was
Yeah.
cool. And then, so those were the earliest memories of being in the hotels. And those were the operational days for my parents. And then getting into their own business, or owning and running the business for themselves was a lot of traveling. So weekends were
Mm-hmm.
spent, on road trips, going and visiting hotels or going and shopping new sites or shopping properties to buy, meeting owners,
Yeah.
meeting investors, meeting bankers. And so from a very young age, we didn't know it, but we got exposed to a pretty broad array of what is necessary operationally and
Mm-hmm.
financially for the real estate. And so we didn't play as much Little League as my kids do, but
Yeah.
it was definitely what had to be done because the company was spread out among these little hotels and you had to really be there and be hands on. And
Mm-hmm.
so my first job in the business was that it was very hands on. It was something that was needed. During the summers, I
Mm-hmm.
cleaned air conditioners, cleaned PTACs, and did other little odd jobs for the hotels. And that's just one of many things that people do to work in this business.
Yeah.
The small hotel is still, I think, very relevant, but it's really just whatever people need. I think times are going to change a little bit here and there, but not going to deviate much from still needing a hotel room and needing to be able to maintain that building and maintain some training for your people to be able to service it.
Mm-hmm.
Still pretty simple. Kind of always been that way, and I think
Yeah.
it's always going to be that way. I think some of us got a little bit over our skis in financing here and there. And in a market like Texas, you're able to build for 12 months of the year. You're able to build for a pretty low price. There's land availability. And so that's been one of our challenges. We've been heavily geographically centered in Texas and Louisiana. And so that allows competition pretty easily and the ability to build up a market a little too quickly. Can kind of make financing important. Got to be conservative a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
overall, we're still very pleased with where we are. We want to continue to build and buy and try to keep growing. Obviously, we've got some unique headwinds right now.
Yeah. I'd love to go back to the family piece a little bit more. Having both your mom and your dad in this business and like growing up within that space. One, I'd love to hear what you learned from each of them separately. What was unique from your mom and from your dad that you picked up and learned, whether they told you or by just observing them? And then, like, two, I think it's really interesting that you stayed in the business, right? Like you lived it as a kid, and a lot of times people will want to try to get away from that. But what pulled you in? Like what keeps you in the hospitality space? What's that deeper drive for you that keeps you here?
Well, I think from my dad, I really learned, I mean, so many things. Gosh, to condense it is very difficult.
Y-
I would say dealing dealing with people, negotiating with people is definitely something unique that, as a young kid, being a fly on the wall
Mm,
and getting to see and hear things is something that was a part of my life, really my whole life. And that it put me in
yeah.
situations where I was able to see my dad do things that were taking risk, I guess is maybe the best way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to take risk, learning what's worth risk, how to know first with your gut what to spend time on. Is that just at a high level? Is this something that we can do? Let's step outside the box. Let's step outside the situation, look at it with objective eyes, and try to see the whole picture and not lose the forest for the trees. That is, I think, a really important element of business that a lot of people think they're like doing a task. And yes, like there are tasks. Of course, you
Mm-hmm.
can't get something done if you're not work oriented
Yeah.
and results driven. But we can't just be blindered
Mm-hmm.
and only see the thing in front of us. We need to make sure we understand the full picture. And my dad has that ability. He can see the whole picture. He works at it though. I mean, he reads a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He's been in the business a long time, but that's not what it is. I mean, he really works hard knowing and understanding the situation that he's in and things that are going on. And so having that training has been maybe one of the bigger things from him. The value of that high level awareness is really important now. It was less important to me at a lower level in my work, in my career, but having that ability now is incredibly valuable, and I'm able to apply that in a lot of ways. From my mom, I've learned, I don't want to say the opposite of my mom, but my mom kind of get the ready, fire, aim
Mm-hmm.
label a little bit, which is, I think, for operations, a fantastic approach that we're going to shoot first and ask questions later and be incredibly action
Mm-hmm.
oriented because you have to get stuff done. Let's fail fast and really push it to begin delivering results. And I've also learned so many things, Josh. Gosh, man, you put me on the
Yeah.
spot.
No,
But
I know.
I think also I've learned a lot of the things that I could do better because working with family, you're able to do, it's a double-edged sword. You're able to get through some things faster, better. And sometimes though it's selling uphill a little bit. You're moving against the grain a little bit because it's family and you communicate differently. You sometimes treat each other differently. So I've certainly also learned the value of having to be more conscious about how you work together because it's obviously different to be with a traditional environment than
Yeah.
it is to be with your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely resonate with the importance of that balance that you've seen with your parents. I see that with my work partner, Chris, right? He's thoughtful, methodical, conscious of risk. I'm pushing forward, creative, right? Like there's the balance of the marriage there is like so important. And I think it's one of the things that's helped us be successful is we're very different, but we're also deeply committed to each other. And like I think you've seen that same thing like with your parents, right? It's very different perspectives, which then creates a whole level of tension that's super valuable with how you grow as a company. Um, and also they know, right, that they're committed together to solving it, like to getting through. And that it's like something that just one person I don't think can ever do on their own, right?
Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody can. I don't know too many of those people.
Yeah, yeah,
It's also just a time
yeah.
allocation. I mean, we need
Mm-hmm.
man hour
Yeah,
to do everything we're doing, and so
yeah. You need
getting
roles to play. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we need to be
Mm-hmm.
to be in concert,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's one of the exciting things that we're doing right now is further transitioning from a smaller mom and pop shop, which
Mm-hmm.
I would say existed until maybe the 2005 to 2010 range when they started spending more time on the business itself and formalizing elements of the business that supported the activity in the field and supported some of the additional development and acquisition growth that's happened over the last 15 or so years. Maybe phase 2 of that is now occurring, where we're trying to reshuffle some of the core commercial services above property, as well as add a scale to our business development, to our growth, that will help us to take on more and do it more quickly.
Yeah.
But
What's
this is
the
kind of, we're dependent a little bit on the nature of the economy right now,
Mhm.
which we haven't completely figured out. We're
Yeah.
trying to.
Paint the picture for me. So it sounds like, I mean, mid 70s, your parents don't own a hotel at all.
Right.
And then they're doing so well that the people who were running that company want to hand it over to them. I think that's like amazing in itself.
Yeah, there were a few things there that were happening in the lives of the owners of the parent company
Hmm.
that drove them to make some exit decisions out of certain businesses that
Yeah.
they weren't personally married to. Nick and
Yeah.
Vicky sort of found each other pursuing
Hmm.
their own work interests,
Hmm.
and so I think that alignment helped them. They had a partner in the business like you do, that they
Yeah.
really felt reliable. Like anything good, send two people out, much better than sending
Hmm.
one, right? There's a reason
Hmm.
for that, right? There's
Yeah.
power in numbers.
Hmm.
And that, I think, was a huge part of their ability to create a little bit of culture and commitment in those
Hmm.
early years, that then gave them enough staying power of and trust of management, which is anybody that invests in hotels knows is really the core.
Hmm.
Then they earned the right to take on someone's investment, which still wasn't their money when they began participating, or not a lot of their money when they began participating in ownership or attempting ownership. So they kind of took this, small
Hmm.
thing that was really just management, and management really of the small hotels, because the parent company spun off the big hotels in order to fund other things and to drag
Yeah.
cash for their
Hmm.
other needs. And so what was left were the small assets. And so it wasn't like a giant fee engine
Yeah.
that, don't think Aimbridge or anything like that at all. It was just a very small
Yeah.
number of employees. And so they took that, and with a base of operations, which again is sort of the core to the success,
Hmm.
they were able then to leverage that knowledge into getting some investors to believe, get a bank to believe, and
Hmm.
then, wow, I really got these people to say yes. And now it's sort of like, wow, it's a tiger by
Yeah.
the tail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I own my own business, and it's like, wow, I got to make it
Yeah.
happen. And
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
early years, there were months where they didn't have enough money for payroll. They didn't know how they were going to make it, but they pulled through. And
Hmm.
like you hear a lot of people do.
Yeah.
It's what you got to
And
do.
then what's this, almost 50 years later? What a transformation, right? Can you describe to me the size of your company? So if that's like assets, value of the assets, or how many properties and what some of those are, but it's crazy to think about, like in those 50 years, all the things that have happened, but like to look fast forward to today, where are you now?
So the company grew in third party management and owned assets, or investments under management. The company has kind of fluctuated between 10 and 25 hotels for the last 20 years. And we've trimmed down to about a dozen hotels today. We've got the ability to grow. We've kind of maintained our above property scale. We haven't really made a lot of cuts above property so that we can take on more. And we think that maybe 25 to 30 hotels is probably a good target. We could be bigger than that, but at much more scale than that, you have a tough time going to all the hotels. And
Mm-hmm.
while we trust the people we work with, it's a very hands-on business. And so we're trying to think about ways that we could have effect or participate in and have an impact on assets that are further away or at a greater scale. And how can we partner with local expertise or sort of align with local expertise in different ways to maybe expand and get us greater reach. But,
Mm-hmm.
probably traditional hotel basics is what's going to continue to be successful.
Yeah.
And so I think you got to be around. You got to get there to the hotels. You have to talk to the teams. You got to do all the normal things that are necessary. And so we just don't want to be ineffective. We don't want to
Yeah.
be blowing smoke.
And like you said, having the
Not that
trust of
anybody's
the
out there
folks at
blowing
the
smoke
local.
and
Yeah, yeah,
ineffective,
yeah.
but
But you found like what works for you and your family, right? So it's that and that trust at the local hotel level, and like I would say you're principled in your approach that you want any of these hotels that you do own, you want to be involved in and have their trust. And some of that level of a relationship isn't possible at scale, a much larger scale than what you're saying, those like 30, 35 hotels.
yeah, it is. It's just it requires an above property
Yeah.
network that
Different
is,
strategy. Yeah.
maybe employs a little
Mhm.
different strategy, but we're playing with a few
Mhm.
things to test out maybe some different ways to deliver service that has a little better cost or can be scaled better where the cost is maybe still the same today, but it will grow less than our existing structure or system once we're bigger. So there's a few
Mhm.
different ways that we're playing with that. That really is the nature of growing a business, right? So those are the things
Yeah.
that as business operators we're less experienced in. I can tell you what better about how to grow hotel revenues and
Mhm.
make hotel profits than I can tell you how to best organize all of the commercial services necessary to grow an enterprise, right? And so
Mhm.
we've tried to leverage outside expertise in doing that,
Mhm.
in planning for corporate changes and being smart business owners. And I think that we're set up very well to continue to grow. We're excited about the future. I think that we will see more transactions in hotel real estate, and that inevitably will create opportunity. I think we're also going to see more more of us reaching for these innovations, both at the property level and how we execute service for guests, and how to make that more enjoyable for the guest and more profitable for the owner. And then I think we're also going to be playing with sort of how can we become more efficient above property? Is that different ways of doing things? Is it merging and collaborating with our contemporaries? Is it breaking down sort of the third party management structure? You represent some of that sort of splintering or breakdown and
Mhm.
specialization, maybe. So there's a few things I think out there that everybody's still kind of toying with and are
Yeah.
things that could be that aren't completely mainstream and
Mhm.
flowing the way that maybe they will in the
Um,
future.
that's an interesting thought, right? Like I think about following the incentives within this business, and I can see how they're sometimes misaligned, right? So like if you have one person that's an owner, and then you have a brand, and then you have a management company, right? The incentive for the brand is I want as much revenue flowing through this as possible to get the incentive on the end. For the management company, it is about top line revenue first and then GOP second. But sometimes that's not like maybe what's in the best interest of the hotel. I think that's part of like what we're trying to solve in some way is how can we provide a service that we don't have skin in the game in the way that we're trying to influence results. Like our objectivity is our strength. Sometimes incentives can drive the wrong behaviors. So you try to scale too quickly or you try to push one side of things that then results in poor health overall. Yeah, I'd love to do some more of that exploration with you of what would that look like down the road in this world in hospitality. Because some folks are trying to do that at scale of let's have the power of thousands of hotels under one management company. But I think that we've seen some of the challenges that come from that.
Well, I think this kind of goes to, I think, management of anything. Let's pick on the government right now. Let's pick on the
Mm-hmm.
federal government because they're just such an easy target. All
Mm-hmm.
right. Washington, D.C. can do some things incredibly well. All right. I mean, let's give it up for them for the things that they can do incredibly well. The problem is there's just not that many of those things. So
Mm-hmm.
if you've got one central management for an array of
Mm-hmm.
services necessary,
Right.
it's incredibly heavy ask of that one
Mm-hmm.
central
Yeah.
management, right? That's just not
Yeah.
logical.
Mm-hmm.
Let's imagine that we've got central oversight, but that we farm out the tasks to real experts. Now we can't always do that, right? We talk on property about the quality of a chief engineer and are they a Yellow Pages chief? A lot of people don't even know what Yellow Pages is anymore, right?
Mm.
But are they a chief engineer who calls for everything to be done by a third party, or do they actually know how to do things themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I mean
Yeah.
you kind of
Mm-hmm.
need a hybrid of that, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that right now with um two things, the need for profitability to improve and therefore be tested, challenged, right? We need to
Right.
be creating some of this. And I think the availability of tech today, these two things together, I mean, my goodness, we're going to create some new ways of doing things. And
Mm-hmm.
so it could be all new, but probably not. Probably just the continuation of things we're already seeing.
Yeah.
So I see like a big aim bridge, and I wonder like, or even companies that might be doing some of these broad services better, right? Like Highgate, for instance, not to tout anybody specifically, but they're just who I think of first. They're trying to sell individual services, right? A lot of companies are trying to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it does make more sense that you have like the aim bridge of revenue management, but that's all they do. And they're the
Mm-hmm.
best and they're the baddest. And they have a way to silo your hotel from everybody else's and they know
Mm-hmm.
everything and they become, but maybe not because yeah, revenue is you start crossing over, but accounting, okay, so maybe accounting and we have the best hospitality accounting company and they sort of take over the space. So maybe there is a specialty that kind of everybody goes to instead of a manager who tries to do everything who everybody goes to. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how does that end up shaking out? And in any case, whichever way it goes or a different way, you still have to have that local presence. It's still an incredibly
Yeah.
local business. We are still
Yeah.
never going to get away from it, right? I mean, for
Mm-hmm.
you, I would imagine that like if you've got California covered up because you've got two people who are all over the state, like if I come from California, you're kind of like, oh, I really need a Florida experienced person because
Mm-hmm.
that's where we have opportunity, right? And so having that local expertise for our business is still absolutely necessary for the top
Mm-hmm.
line.
Yeah.
And then to be able to really be effective and have a quality team, you got to know people on the ground. You got to be likable. You have to be friendly. You have to have a fun place to work. And so to have that, you can't just be flying in from another city. It just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work. So how do
Mm-hmm.
we figure out how to like get these second generation, the me's, how do we
Mm-hmm.
keep that generation engaged and effective in some of this? I think that's really interesting. We think a lot about that because so much of the industry is owned by families.
Yeah.
It's institutions are owning more and certainly are the big properties are owned by institutions, but the majority of the rooms are owned by families. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's interesting to see how that's going to change over the next few
Yeah.
years. Anyway, that's some nerdy
Yeah.
insight. I'm droning on.
I think it's worth digging into because also there's the increase in specialization without an increase in transparency and accountability, I think leads to a loss of control, right? So as an owner, I'm sure that that's something that you're very much thoughtful about is if I'm working with a brand that keeps all of our data and won't tell us how decisions are being made, that makes it a lot harder to run a successful business.
And my heartstrings now.
I think that we're entering into an interesting space, right? Especially you see what's going on with AI and large language models and decisioning, that there lots of hospitality industry aside, lots of folks will be building these large language models like behind a wall, right? It's like, this is our data and we have access to this data. And we're going to build decisioning on that. And we're not going to tell you how how we got to what we got to.
Well, I think that's still there's a lot yet to be fleshed out. It
Yeah.
may be that those best practices are unavailable to everyone first.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard
Mm-hmm.
time believing that eventually that the cat didn't get out of the bag
Mm-hmm.
and everybody has the same tools. And so I think that maybe the future gets better pound for pound
Yeah.
as everybody has access to better and better sales tools, things that are affecting
Mm-hmm.
top line sales. But still,
Mm-hmm.
those AI formulas are generated by us, right? They're generated by people. You're still having to
Mm-hmm.
tell it what to do. And secondly, the consumer behavior is still what it is. And the employee behavior, the
Yeah.
service provider behavior is still what it
Yeah.
is. So
Yeah.
there will
That's
be
right.
people who work better and harder trying to
Mm-hmm.
have the maximum, effectiveness to that formula, that
Yeah.
logarithm or whatever. And there's going to be other people that are like, look, I bought the whatever off the shelf. It's good enough. And
Yeah.
so there is still going to
Mm-hmm.
be, I think,
Yeah.
human nature that keeps us
Mm-hmm.
grounded and
Yeah.
forces us to still
Yeah.
compete. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's still going to be a normal marketplace, but it might some of these tools might bring us closer together and diminish
Mm-hmm.
some of the competitiveness today that's out there because as you streamline and best practice and make things more and more efficient, I mean theoretically the people that aren't doing it as well today get a little better, and the people that
Right.
are doing it great today probably don't have as much
Mm-hmm.
upside.
It'll
Um,
level things out there. Yeah, there's two interesting trends going on. AI is happening, and that's a lot of times happening behind closed doors. But then there's also this world of Web3, blockchain, which is decentralized ownership or continuing to retain ownership and transparency with the growth of something. And I think that space has a lot of like interesting where, over the last decade, big brands have gotten bigger in the technology world and then they put walls around their stuff. But I think that there's a lot of new and interesting technology that's going to help decentralize and increase transparency. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in this world. And in our world, it's never only tech reliant. It's so much, like you said, based on the people that you have, the principles that they've got. And like as the technology speeds up, it's just so much more important that you've got wise people with a depth of expertise that are the ones behind the machine
no,
that
no,
are
really. I
keeping
mean,
things in line.
I can't stress enough how annoying it is that we have all this tech, and yet it still doesn't.
Yeah.
It still can't. It's useless. If you take your hand off of it for a day, you feel panic that you haven't touched it, right? I mean, is
Mm-hmm.
that? I mean,
Yeah.
there's probably
Yeah.
there's probably whole counseling sessions
Mm-hmm.
for revenue managers
Mm-hmm.
now on not opening your laptop for 2 days and don't panic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the business is going to change, but it's still going to be the same. We still have to be
Yeah.
smart business owners, and we still have to be really smart operators. And the majority of what we need to do is pretty basic. So.
Yeah. It's taking care of people. All right. Thanks, Nick. This has been great.